So let's begin by taking a moment to close our eyes, slowing down the breath, focusing on the here and now, letting go of all other thoughts, calming the mind down. Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Shri Saraswatyai Namaha. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahmavidvaram Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavatpada Shankaram Loka Shankaram. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. So good evening, everybody. So last week we saw the first verse of Tattvabodha, where Bhagavan Adi Shankaracharya ji invokes the blessings of the Lord and his Guru, and he talks about explaining the text Tattvabodha for the purpose of liberation of a mumukshu. All right. So we saw what does liberation means. Liberation is just liberation from sorrows, and the mumukshu is the one who seeks this liberation. So this is what we saw in the last class, and we were also inquiring into the nature of one's intentions, the ultimate intention, the ultimate motivation for us to do any action. We were inquiring about that in last class. So today we are going to directly proceed to the next verse. Okay, so let me share the screen for the next verse, and then we can directly jump into the session. All right. So here, Bhagavan Adi Shankaracharya ji says, Sadhana chatushtaya sampannadhikarinam moksha sadhana bhutam Tattvabodha prakaram vakshyamaha. Let's repeat that once again. Sadhana chatushtaya sampannadhikarinam moksha sadhana bhutam Tattvabodha prakaram vakshyamaha. So what does this verse mean is, we shall explain to those who are endowed with the fourfold qualification, the mode of inquiry into the reality, which is the means of liberation. Let me repeat that again. We shall explain to those who are endowed with the fourfold qualifications. That is, what is this? Sadhana chatushtaya sampannadhikarinam, the mode of inquiry into the reality. Tattvabodha prakaram, which is the means of liberation. Moksha sadhana bhutam. So this is what the second verse is all about. All right. So we will be seeing about the fourfold qualification. So even before we ask what is this sadhana chatushtaya sampannadhikarinam, what are those fourfold qualifications, all that we will be seeing in the subsequent verses. In Tattvabodha, whenever any new term comes into being, Adi Shankaracharya ji will explain it. He himself will give the definition. Okay, so we will keep that aside for a moment, and we will see the explanation for this verse now. All right, so here let us focus on the mode of inquiry into reality. Tattvabodha prakaram. That's what is being sent here, right? So we saw in the last class that Vedanta is the systematic study of the self, where we are guided step by step towards self-realization. So it's like an operation manual, right? So where it is given detailed instructions about our own self. That's what the Vedanta is. So this right way of thinking and inquiry is the means of liberation. All right. So here he is saying, the mode of inquiry into reality. See, here we have to pay a little attention to this. All Vedantic texts, for that matter, they help us with right thinking. They are going to guide us towards the right thinking, right? And it is up to us to actually do the thinking and realize that reality for our own self, right? It is not like, it doesn't give us an, A plus B is equal to C. It doesn't say like that. It says, oh, A is there, A means this, B means this, plus means we have to do like this. If you do that, find out what comes out for yourself. So that's how most of the texts will also be, right? So it is only going to guide us into the inquiry into reality. Another thing is, as we proceed in the book also, we will understand that this reality is something that is beyond any description of words. For example, if we say big, all right, just the word big. What do we imagine big? How do we imagine this word big? All right, we can't imagine a big that is limitless. Isn't it? When we say big, probably it is in relation to something else. We will imagine this word big, isn't it? With this adjective big. But so suppose I'm saying limitlessly big. How do we visualize this limitless? Just think. Is it even possible for us to visualize this limitless? Is it even possible for the brain to comprehend the idea limitless? It's very difficult. No, you can't express it through words, because words by themselves are limiting in nature, isn't it? So all these texts, all these studies, they are only going to help us guide in the right direction as to how we should apply our thinking. So that is why here also Bhagwan Adi Shankaracharya ji says he is going to explain the mode of inquiry into reality. He is not saying I'm going to explain the reality. He is only saying I'm going to explain the mode of inquiry into reality. All right. So that is one important thing that we have to note here. And we already saw in last class, mode of inquiry into reality, which is the means of liberation. So we already saw what liberation is. Liberation is nothing but liberation from sorrows. All right. Good. So what causes sorrow? It's important, right? We all feel that there is one sorrow after another coming towards us. That person is causing me sorrow. This thing is causing me sorrow. My body is causing me sorrow. My health is causing me sorrow. So that is how we usually perceive sorrow, isn't it? So let us take a moment to explore this word sorrow for a moment here, okay? So let's take an example. So now a baby's cry, okay? Let's take this as the example. When a newborn baby is, like, as soon as the baby is born, we hear the wails of the baby, right? And then how we feel? We feel like, wow, we feel so elated. We feel so happy, isn't it? Good. Now the baby is born. After some time, what happens? The baby has like suddenly hurt itself a little bit and it is crying. Same cry only, but how we feel now? We feel very bad, isn't it? Oh no, the baby is hurt. We feel very disturbed by that cry. Then the baby grows further. It goes into its terrible twos. And then some guests have come home. And right in front of the guests, the baby is rolling on the floor and crying and throwing a tantrum. How will we feel at that time? We feel like catching hold of her and giving one tight slap, isn't it? We feel so angry when we hear that cry. The crying is the same. But what is changing here? It is our reaction, isn't it? How we perceive that cry based on the situation and so on. But ultimately, it is our own reaction to the same thing that is causing different responses, correct? So similarly, sorrow is also, it is not an absolute thing. A chocolate in the first bite will give us joy. The chocolate in the same 500th bite will give us sorrow, isn't it? So it is all within us only, the sorrow, also this joy, it all comes from within us. And all sorrows in life, they say sorrow is the cause for bondage. And you know what Guruji says? He says all sorrows is caused by only three things. Okay. One is either lack of thinking. We don't think about it. Or there is incomplete thinking about it. Or there is the completely wrong thinking around that particular situation. So three things is the main reason for sorrow. Incomplete thinking, lack of thinking, or wrong thinking. So through this Tattvabodha, that is why I'm saying is here, Bhagwan Sri Adi Shankaracharya ji is saying he's going to guide us through the right thinking. So once we have the right thinking, then automatically the sorrows that we face in life will be greatly diminished. All right. If only we could practice the pause before reacting to every situation, If only we could be a little more aware of the thoughts that is going on inside our head, we will realize that most of the thoughts are unnecessary. And with the dropping of the thoughts, our sorrows also diminish to a very large extent, isn't it? So right thinking is very important, and that is what this text is going to help us with. Another thing that we have to be aware of is how cognizant we are of our thoughts. Are we even aware of our thoughts? Like, what exactly is the mind thinking right now? Maybe now you're listening to this, but at the same time in the background, some other thought will be going on. Oh, what to make for dinner? Who's going to come home tomorrow? What plans do I have for Sunday? How much more time left? How long is she going to keep? So many thoughts will automatically keep going on in our mind. But how aware we are of those thoughts, that is also important. Only when we are aware of our thoughts, we become equipped to do the right thinking, isn't it? So that is another important thing that we have to pay attention to over here. So one other thing that I would like to share is our thoughts, the nature of our thoughts, right? Isn't it very disorganized? Most of the time, even if we want to pursue a single stream of thought, the thoughts automatically becomes very disorganized, right? It goes from one end to the other. It now feels suddenly elated, suddenly depressed. Suddenly we start thinking about somebody at some point of time, what they said 5 years back. And then suddenly we think 20 years down the line, is my savings enough for me to plan my retirement? Our thoughts are so chaotic and they are all over the place most of the time. And when this happens, we are expending a lot of energy too. Thoughts consume a lot of energy, right? And when the thoughts are going in all directions, Bhagavad Gita may say, no, Bahushakaya Anantasya. When the thoughts are going in all different directions, we are expending a lot of energy, which itself will make us feel tired, miserable, angry, irritated, and all this. So it is very, very important to start becoming a little more cognizant of our thoughts and ensure that we are pursuing the right line of thoughts. All right, this is the way to get rid of, or at least minimize, the sorrows that we are facing in our everyday life. So, and then Bhagwan Adi Shankaracharya ji says that he is explaining this right mode of thinking, right mode of inquiry into reality to those endowed with sadhana chatushtaya sampanna, the one who has this fourfold qualification. Okay, so we will see what those qualifications are. So here we have to remember that these fourfold qualifications are something that we have to keep working on ourselves. Okay, we don't have to think, oh, I have to first have this to do the inquiry. Both can happen parallelly. All right, good. So let's just move on to what are the fourfold qualifications. All right, here also we will be coming across some new terms, and for each of the term we will be seeing definitions. Okay, so let us move on to the next verse. See, he himself is asking the question. This is how this book will also be. Sadhana chatushtayam kim? Nitya nitya vastu vivekaha iha mutrartha falabhoga viragaha shamadhi shatka sampatti mumukshutvam cheti. So he is asking, what is sadhana chatushtaya? First one is nitya nitya vastu vivekaha. Viveka is the first one. Iha mutrartha falabhoga viragaha. Vairagya is the second one. Shamadhi shadga sampatti. So that is shamadama, the sixfold wealth. That also we'll be seeing one by one. Okay, so for now, just make note of it. And the fourth one is mumukshutvam cheti. So these are the fourfold qualifications. So now we will directly go into the first qualification, all right, which is nitya nitya vastu vivekaha. All right, so here Bhagwan himself is asking the question, nitya nitya vastu vivekaha kaha? Nityavastvekam Brahma tat vyatiriktam sarvam anityam ayameva nitya nityavastu vivekaha. Let's see this one more time. Nitya nityavastu vivekaha kaha. What is the meaning of nitya? That is permanent, anitya, ephemeral, vastu. What is the discrimination? What is the viveka means discrimination? All right. What is the nitya nitya vastu viveka? Nitya vastvekam Brahma. All right. And tat vyatiriktam sarvam anityam ayameva nitya nitya vastu vivekaha. Reality alone is eternal. Here, Brahma doesn't mean Brahmaji, okay? It is Brahma, which is the self, which is the reality. It is that Brahma. Reality alone is eternal. Everything else is ephemeral. Tattvabodha sarvam anityam. Everything else, leaving that Brahma aside, everything else is anityam. Everything else is ephemeral. This conviction alone is the discrimination between the permanent and impermanent. All right. So this is the first definition that we have come across, and we are going to see this. All right. Viveka is something that all organisms have. Okay. It is the ability to distinguish. It is the ability of the intelligence to differentiate, to distinguish, to categorize, to organize. We all have that ability, right? That is what is Viveka. Even animals have this, right? They know what to eat, what not to eat. They know who is a friend, who is a foe. All this, even animals are able to distinguish. And we are also obviously able to distinguish, but we can go one step further. We can even distinguish between what is the goal, what is the means for the goal. We are able to distinguish between that. We are able to distinguish between a part and the whole. Like, for example, the hand is a part, body is the whole. We are able to do that kind of distinction and categorization. And we are also able to do this Shreya Preya differentiation, which is the differentiation between what is good and what is pleasant. And we are also able to clearly see what is good for us in the short term and what is good for us in the long term. All these kind of distinction, differentiation, we are able to do, right? Intellectually, we are capable of it. That is called Viveka. So here Adi Shankaracharya talks about Nitya Anitya Viveka, which is the differentiation between that which is permanent and that which is impermanent. All right. And he is saying Brahma, that one reality, the truth, the self, however you may call it, that alone is permanent. Everything else, including you, me, the body, the earth, the universe, the stars, sun, moon, everything else is impermanent. And that ability to distinguish is called Viveka. All right. So before we go into reality, Brahma and all that, let us take a moment to observe in our own life. Okay. So what is the only thing that is constant in the universe? Very famous saying. Everybody says this. What is the only thing that is constant? Change. Change alone is constant, isn't it? Nothing remains constant. Correct? Everything else, every second, every microsecond, change is happening all around us without any break whatsoever. So in this constantly changing world, we have only one thing which is called as a relative permanence. So we can only compare one thing with another and say this is relatively permanent to that. Isn't it or not? For example, we have the ocean and we have the waves. We can compare these two and say waves are impermanent, ocean is permanent. But if we take it in totality, even ocean is impermanent, isn't it? Maybe in another 5 billion years, this earth itself will not be there, isn't it? We will also not be there. So we can only have this concept called relative permanence in our everyday life. Similarly, for example, our own body, right? And the identification of this personality. So Aruna knows that she was a tiny baby, and Aruna knows that she is now a 34-year-old woman, and Aruna also knows that she's going to go old and this body is going to drop. So in comparison to my ego, my body is also changing, body is also impermanent. There is only this relative permanence, isn't it? So here we can know about the change, we can observe this change only when we are looking at it from something that is not changing. Like, for example, only when we are stationary and we look up at the sky, we see that the clouds are moving. If we are also moving, like how we do in that when we drive an automobile, the moon also comes along with us, isn't it? We don't feel that the moon is moving. We both are moving together. But if we stop, then we can see the movement of other things happening around us. So change is always observed from a perspective of something that is not changing. Is this clear? This concept of relative permanence. All right. So if we take that, if we're going to expand it, everything else is going to change. The universe is changing every single second, isn't it? New galaxies are born, new stars are being born, black holes are being formed. Everything is changing every single second. And for all this change to happen, there should be one substratum, isn't it? Change can happen only when there is something that is not changing. And the something that is not changing should be a single entity. Because if there are two entities in which change is not happening, again, relative permanence concept will come. Is this clear? It's a little technical. Any doubts in this? Is this clear? You can probably give me a thumbs up. All right, I hope everybody is clear. So, starting from simple things in life, where we are having the concept of relative permanence, like for example, we are having an issue with somebody at work. We will always understand whether it is a short-term issue or it is a long-term issue, right? Relatively, we will check. We all do that in our everyday life, isn't it? And then if it is short-term, we don't like, okay, jane do, we don't bother too much about it. And when it becomes long-term, then we try to find a solution. All right. So this is an everyday balance. Thank you for the thumbs up. Similarly, if we are going to take it step by step, there is always going to be something that is relatively more permanent than the other thing. All right. So this, if you are going to expand it into this whole creation itself, and we know that this whole creation itself is changing every second, then there should be something that is not changing for the change to happen. Only when the ocean is not changing, the waves can happen on top of the ocean, isn't it? Yes or no? Similarly, only when the river bed is there, stable, steady, the river can flow on top of it. The change can happen on top of it. Yes or no? Similarly, when the ego, is constant and watching my body, the body's change is being perceived and experienced, isn't it? Like that. Imagine for this whole existence, this whole creation is changing. So for this whole creation, there is something that is permanent, something that is supporting this entire changing world, entire changing universe, right? The understanding that alone is real and everything else is impermanent is called Viveka. All right, good. So all this is a very high concept. So let us see how this Viveka is going to be applied in our everyday life. All right. The first level of application of this discriminative faculty of the intellect is to understand what is short-term and what is long-term in our life. All right. Like, for example, if you are going to do something, if you are going to entertain a particular thought, if you are going to interact with someone, whatever we are doing, let us have a perspective of whether it's going to have a long-term impact or a short-term impact. For example, you're attending this discussion, right? Is this going to have a long-term impact on you or a short-term impact on you? It can be different for different people, obviously, right? Like that, for every action, it is very beneficial, not a little beneficial, very beneficial for us to understand what is long-term and what is short-term. You know why? Then we can pick and choose our battles accordingly, right? Like right now, if we were to observe, we lose a lot of energy picking on all these short-term battles, short-term inconveniences. We expend so much energy chasing short-term pleasures when we can focus on long-term, isn't it? That's a logical thing to do also, right? And we can also question whether my problems are long-term or short-term. We will have both, but which battles to choose, which problems to attack, then we will have a lot of clarity in our actions and thoughts, isn't it? And similarly, we can also question, we do various habit forming resolutions and all this. Are they going to help me in the short term or in the long term? For example, I'm following a 21-day diet challenge. Is it going to help me in the short term? Okay, after 21 days, we may lose weight, but is it going to be sustainable? All these things, we can start using this Viveka. So it's like building a muscle, right? You start applying it in accessible things, and then slowly, our vision broadens, the muscle becomes stronger, and we are able to comprehend the really big picture, isn't it? So that's how we build this. And the more we use the faculty, the more intensely we will become aware that everything is changing. Correct? And once we start becoming aware that everything is changing, remember what we said, only when something is permanent, we can observe the change happening around that permanent phenomenon, right? Then we will start identifying more and more with that single substratum, which is not changing, which is always permanent. All right. So this is what this Viveka is about. A little technical, no? So it is a Vedantic book of definitions. So obviously it will get a little technical, but is this making sense, at least in a practical level? Any doubts in this verse? Anything that you would want me to take you through one more time?
No, ma'am, it's clear, ma'am.
It's clear? All right, great. So here, now we have our, I thought I will do one more verse today. I think I was just over ambitious. Okay, so now we come to our homework for the week part. Okay, so take one thing that you really like. All right, or one thing that is really bothering you. Take anything or any situation or any person for that matter, and ask yourself whether it is long term or short term. Just ask. And if it is short term, see whether you are spending a lot of your time, energy, efforts in rectifying that situation. Whether it is worth it, you can question that. If it is long term, then we will have a different kind of perspective to attack that problem, isn't it? So just within everybody has long term and short term problems. Just try to identify which is long term, which is short term. Something that is bothering you really too much, take that one thing, check if it is short term or long term, and observe how much energy, time, efforts you are spending on that one situation. All right. So this is the homework for this week for all of us. Okay. So next definition we will see in the next class. Is this okay? Anything else you want to share? Anything? Any doubts, questions, clarifications? The change and changeless, nitya, anitya is clear, no? Everything is changing, but for every change to happen, there should be something that is constant, and that alone is real. Everything else is not real. So that is what Viveka, that intellectual realization, the subjective realization is called Viveka, and we will be able to identify with that only when we start intensely observing the changes that is happening around us every single moment. All right, so that is what is the first qualification that we saw today. All right, okay, so if there are no more, yes, thanks Soumya. Yes, so we will finish the class with the prayers. So this time I got the prayers. Okay, so we will chant our closing prayer and we will finish the class. Right? Good. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.